District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Baker, so good to catch up with you. Welcome to my podcast. Thanks for coming on.
How's it going, Gabrielle? Thanks for having me.
It's going. I think in the world of conservation, I know you guys in your realm too are watching what is happening. I would love for people to know, Baker, more about your background because I've met you on several occasions, especially when I came to your guys' women's hunt in South Georgia a couple of years ago. So I got to know you and a couple of your associates, had a great time. I was able to christen your muzzleloader, got my first deer on a muzzleloader, and that was a really fun experience. But tell people about your background before we wade into some of the most interesting things relating to hunter voter habits.
For the record, I have not fired that muzzleloader since you shot it. It has not been fired.
Oh, boy.
It's just sitting there. It's batting 1,000. One shot, one kill. So I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. And like most Southern boys, played sports and football and everything. And I ended up going off to college, and I was good enough in high school sports to be recruited to play in college. So I went to play college football, and on the third day I learned I was not good enough to play college. I was good enough to stay on the team, but that wasn't very much fun. Then we ended up playing soccer my last 2 years, graduated from the University of Georgia. I played on the men's club team for soccer, and then I graduated from University of Georgia and moved down to Key West for about 6 months and worked on a dive boat, which was just like super cool and exciting. And then all of a sudden, I realized that Key West was the furthest place in the continental United States that you can go without leaving the country. So all of the locals at the time, my opinion was all the locals were running from child support, taxes, alimony, government, the police. I was like, one night I was sitting in my apartment and I remember talking to my mom on the phone and I was like, what am I doing? So I packed up my little car and drove all the way home to Savannah, Georgia, and got into real estate, which was awesome. So it's 2002, and the real estate market was just exploding and just king of the world, and started buying properties and renovating them and renting them out. And then we started buying buildings in downtown Savannah and doing condo conversions, and amassed a fortune. And then when the market started to crash in 2008, I lost everything I had to the tune of about $15 million. Felt sorry for myself for about 48 hours and realized that was a complete waste of my time. And I was talking to my brother who had just started medical school. He's like, you should join the military. So I was going to go through the National Guard, a program called Rep 63, which is you just go straight into Special Forces selection. And I was on my way to Camp Blanding, and they're like, hey, you have an inguinal hernia and your shoulder's shot. You won't pass MEPS. And I was like, well, man, I got to do something. And so I started going through the Defense Foreign Service Agent program with the Department of State, and realized if I had language and medical, I'd be it's a shoe-in. So I went off to NYU to get a master's degree in Arabic and was doing emergency medicine at Columbia at night. And like I said, I'd lost everything, and I was like, it was a rough time. Like, you're 32 years old, you're king of the world, and your little pond, and then all of a sudden you're tumbling down the mountain, and just wasn't a happy time. And then I started a little CrossFit apparel company called Tupood, which is actually an official sponsor of the CrossFit Games, and that was in December of 2010. And then fast forward 6 months, we started a drink company called Killcliff, and I realized that I didn't want to get a master's degree in Arabic, and I was an entrepreneur at heart, and that was the path. And then ever since then, I've just kind of been off to the races. So we ended up selling Tupood about 6 years ago and did pretty well with that. And then Killcliff, we sold to two different venture capital firms between 2017, between 2014 in 2018, we ended up selling Killcliff to two different venture capital firms, which was, exciting. And then we actually ended up buying that company back from the VC firm we sold it to for pennies on the dollar a year and a half ago. So super exciting times there. But when I left Killcliff on the final VC sale, I met Evan Hafer, who's the CEO or chairman of the board and the founder of Black Rifle Coffee, which is what this shirt is, and just hit it off. And I've been with Black Rifle for 9 years, and I am the director of strategic relations for Black Rifle, which is a publicly traded, very conservative, right, 2A, first responder, veteran-focused coffee company. And I own a consulting company as well called Digital Mongoose, and I work with a bunch of brands in the hunting and the outdoor space, 2A space. And then I was approached back in the fall from a buddy of mine who was like, "Hey man, we're doing this thing in DC. It's some political consulting stuff. Would you have any interest?" And I was like, "Well, like it depends on like what the gig is, and devil's in the details." And we talked, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I'd absolutely down to help. Anything I can do." I mean, I'm not super happy with the direction that our country is heading. On the surface, I'll say that. Like, I don't think it is as bad as the media and a lot of people would have you believe. But there is some stuff that I don't like at all about. I'll be 49 next month. I'm almost half a century old. Man, that's a long time, isn't it? God, that's a long time. So I have two projects I'm working on out of DC. One is vote the number 4 America.org, and the other project is smokelessvets.org, which is we want to get 1 million veterans off of cigarettes by 2030. So, and then also I have the nonprofit Hunter Recruitment Project, which you've participated in. Mm-hmm. And the HRP, Jamie and I came up with the idea in Africa in 2018, maybe 2000. I don't remember. And every year I've quoted for those listening is plus or minus 2 years. Okay. Like, my memory's not as good as it once was, but it's not as bad as someone's from TV last night, but I'm not going to say any more about that. We've hunted on 4 continents, 24 states. That's my primary form of recreation. Melissa, my wife, is a huge fan. She loves it. She's traveled to several places with me. And, we came up with the concept for the Hunter Recruitment Project in Africa 6-7 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever. And Jamie and I have hunted together on 3 continents. We travel all over the place hunting together. And it's like, you get to a point where like you've harvested enough animals and like killing an animal doesn't really, there's other components. You realize once you've gotten a bunch of trophies on your wall and all that stuff, that the other components of hunting are the things that you really adore. And, for me, it's the process. It's the, I'm not a systems and process guy in life, in my professional life at all. Not even the least bit. I like to say I bring the razzle dazzle, to whatever we're working on. I'm gonna bring the razzle dazzle to it. But like I'm not a systems and process guy. I hate systems and processes because it feels like it confines me. And as like a marketing type person, a network person, I don't like it. But with hunting, it's the systems and the processes that I actually truly love, which is you're creating an opportunity. You figure out what you want to do, and your buddies, you're planning the trip, and you're getting ready for it, and you're talking about it, and you're texting about it, and everybody's excited, and people really feed off of emotion. And so, I've never like really been on a hunting trip where it wasn't just awesome, no matter how easy or hard it was. And so what we do with the Hunter Recruitment Project is, shooting animals, and between Jamie and I and Michael, we've put, good God, hundreds, probably 1,000 animals on the ground in our lifetime. And introducing that to people that have never done it is truly rewarding. And like, I don't want it to sound hokey or cliche at all, but like, I truly, truly am happy watching people experience things that I cannot go back and do because it's in the past. Like I remember the first deer I killed. I remember the first elk I ever killed. I remember the first bear. I remember the first time I went to Africa. I remember all these things. And it's just like, if I could share that like joy with another person, that is the closest I'll ever get to reliving those moments. And so that's why we do it is, like we have depredation tags at the farms, and it's like we have to harvest a bunch of deer every year because they, destroy crops. And like shooting a deer, to me, there's no meaning to it. But you, like we've talked on the phone, whether it be video call or on the phone twice in the past 2 weeks. And every time you've mentioned that muzzleloader, and it's like, I know a ton of people. I mean, I know, Gabby, I know thousands of hunters. And I'm like, I wonder what percent have ever killed a deer with a muzzleloader. And then what percent killed their first deer with a muzzleloader? Probably zero, So it's little things like that are just truly meaningful. And so hunting and conservation, it's a big part of who I am and what I do. Conservation is not a primary. I'm a very honest hunter. I don't walk out into the woods thinking about conservation. I don't think about it when I buy a hunting license. It's a byproduct of the system as far as, from a recreational standpoint. I think when hunters talk about conservation, it's like, dude, that's not why you're going hunting. I don't want to hear that because I think that's a bunch of bullshit. Excuse my French, but it's like, no, you're going out into the woods to try and harvest an animal. Primarily, meat, I think, is secondary. The accomplishment is primary, number one. The meat is secondary, and then third is the conservation component. I've been all over the world and I've never walked into the field thinking about conservation. So I think that's kind of like a BS talking point that a lot of people use to try to insulate themselves from being attacked. Like, like, oh, I'm a conservationist. It's like, no, dude, you're a hunter. You're a hunter. That is what you do. You hunt. And our actions lead to massive amounts of conservation. It is a byproduct of what we do. And I say that the United States of America does two things better than any other country on this planet. Finance, number one. No other country can hold a candle to us in finance. Number two, 1A, 1B, the North American Wildlife Management Program, I'd say is number one. Finance is two. There's no country. There's countries that can make an argument for finance, that they do finance really well. There are, but there's no country that sniffs the North American Wildlife Management Program. No. So like last summer, Melissa and I were in Scotland. Was it last summer? Yeah, it was last summer. So we were in Scotland. We went to Isle of Skye, which is millions of acres. It is a massive, massive swath of land. We drove all over Isle of Skye. And I would equate it to those listening, if you've never been, imagine just driving all over the state of Utah, all over it. Saw two animals. Saw two ungulates. Didn't see any deer. We saw two red deer. That was it. Didn't see anything else. And we were driving at sunrise. We were driving at sunset. Like I'm a hunter. When I go out into big grassy open areas, my eyes are always looking for animals. And if we had done that drive in, say, Utah or any other Western state, you'd have seen hundreds of animals, So I think how and what we do is truly, truly remarkable from the North American wildlife management aspect. I'm very proud of it. But so the Hunter Recruitment Project, we take people that have never been hunting or haven't been hunting in many, many years since their childhood. So we have it's retain, recruit, and retention. That's kind of the 3 R's of what we're doing. And it's been great. We've been doing it for 5 years now. We take anywhere from 2 to 4 groups each year. A lot of females. Last year we did a big trip with a bunch of Gold Star wives, which was really, really cool. And it's just been fantastic. It's a lot of fun, and I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoy it. And I literally before I dialed into this interview, I was on a board call with the Hunter Recruitment Project with Jamie and Michael. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got to go. I got to interview with Gabby. They're like, oh, wow. Tell her we said hello. So there we go.
Full circle. No, and you're right about conservation. It is an important component, and it's often talked about here on the podcast. But something that you alluded to as part of your work, and something that I wanted to bring you on for, we've often heard, I've seen the numbers that a lot of hunters and gun owners, they're very animated on social media. They have a lot of opinions, but they don't go out to vote. They talk a great deal often about, preserving your rights, doing this, hunting, but a lot of people don't follow through with voting. And that is what you're trying to work to rectify and fix with voteforamerica.org.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
Okay. So voteforamerica.org, vote the number 4 America.org is I would describe it as an apolitical 501c3, 501c4. Forgive me if I get that wrong. I'm not well versed in the inner beltway vernacular of these things. But we're focused on apolitical influencers, people with influence and reach, micro influencers mostly, that are hunting, 2A, first responder, and veteran focused. Okay. And we started digging and we found some alarming numbers amongst licensed hunters. So I'm going to read off a couple states, and this is licensed hunters in the following states that did not vote in the last election. Okay. And before I get into that, I want to tell you how close these races are. So Lauren Boebert, who I'm not a fan of. I mean, I don't dislike her, but I certainly don't like her. The theatrics and saber rattling, it's not my style. But Lauren Boebert won her congressional seat last year by 30 votes. Brandon Herrera, who's a dear, dear friend of mine, just lost the Texas. He ran against the sitting incumbent.
Tony Gonzalez, yeah.
And the D.C. apparatus spent $10 million on Tony Gonzalez's campaign. Brandon Herrera spent $1 million and was a very famous, well-known 2A gun YouTube guy. All right. He lost that by 407 votes. Was outspent 10-1. So he lost that by 407 votes. And there was also some bad storms in Texas that day. So that, throttled back day of election turnout. So I'm going to read some numbers. Two more things. So for Tim Sheehy, who's running for Senate in Montana against John Tester, for Tim to win that election, he needs to pick up roughly like 3,000 votes. That's it. And for Dave McCormick, who's running in Pennsylvania, I think the number is in the 4,500 to 5,000 range. These are small numbers. This is going to blow everyone's mind away. So I just mentioned Pennsylvania. So in the state of Pennsylvania, there are 515,000 licensed hunters that did not participate in the last election. 515,000 that did not vote. That's 1% is needed there, roughly, give or take. Montana is 52,000. I think the population of Montana is like 1 million people. Mm-hmm. And then you got to think about the hunters. What are they doing in the fall in Montana? They're out in the field. Mm-hmm. Guides, all that stuff. Everyone's out hunting. Wisconsin is a swing state. 338,000 licensed hunters didn't vote in the last election. The state of Texas, 663,000. Florida, where I live, 639,000. Ohio, this is the biggest shocker of all, in my opinion. The state of Ohio is 625,000 licensed hunters didn't vote in the last election. Nevada, also a swing state, 60,000. Michigan, swing state, 370,000. Georgia is 350,000. Florida, I went over Florida.
I think you have Kentucky. Virginia on the list, right?
Oh, Virginia is very much in play this election. 277,000 licensed hunters didn't vote in the last election.
Unbelievable.
Isn't that crazy, though?
It's not a shock to me because I actually heard in Arizona in 2018, because people think, on political lines, Republican, pro-hunting, Democrat, anti-hunting. I'd heard from a former commissioner of Arizona who's a pretty center-right guy. He had told me an interesting revelation. He said because the Republican was anti-hunting, Kirsten Sinema, who is retiring, the Democrat, now independent, she actually was able to win by whatever margin because of 200,000 hunters who voted for her, because she said in meetings, I will support your way of life. So that's kind of an interesting, an aside there in Arizona. But I'm not surprised by these numbers.
Arizona is 133,000 licensed hunters didn't vote in the last election. This is the one that blew me away. They all blew me away, but Illinois, super blue state, 305,000. Minnesota, 261,000. Missouri, 281,000. Nevada's 82,000. New Jersey, 166,000. Tennessee, 311,000. What's everybody doing? What are you guys doing? I don't understand.
In your guys' research into these numbers, in terms of how you extrapolated them, how you found them, have you found and spoke to any of these people who are considered these kind of voter apathetic hunters, gun owners? What's their reasoning behind not voting one way or another?
My vote doesn't count. The system's rigged.
That's what they say?
Absolutely. Wow. Number one, not even close. Number 4, number 6 is I don't want to get jury duty. But yeah, it's my vote doesn't count. The system is rigged. They're going to put in who they want to put in. And I think that is such a defeatist attitude, because that's 2 votes for the other guy. And I think it's incredibly lazy. If you think about, everything I'm about to say is my opinion. It's not the opinion of any of my partners or employers or companies I work for. This is just one man's opinion. There are elements to our society that are far left progressives, and you all know who and what they look like and how they behave and what they do. The activists, the rioting, the Antifa types, all those crazy, crazy people, the people that want men and women's sports, that whole push, which is batshit crazy to me.
My company is fighting that. So yes, I'm very familiar with the battle there. Yeah.
Okay. So I haven't worked out today. When I get off this podcast, I'm literally going to go to the gym and work out. I can set the Florida women's record in bench press, deadlift, and back squat. You give me 5 minutes to warm up. Not per lift, just give me 5 minutes across the board, and I will say, I'm an hour woman in the U.S. Powerlifting Association, USAPL. I am now going to compete as a woman, and I'll cold bore all 3 lifts, and I'll set the women's record in the state of Florida in all 3 of those lifts. We're different. When women and men are different, and to say that a man can compete fairly against women is completely insane. The fastest female time in the history of the 100-meter dash, she would not have qualified for the final heat of the Georgia High School Boys Athletic Association this year in Jefferson, Georgia. The last World Cup before last, which is Women's World Cup before last, which is that was arguably one of the best USA women's national teams ever configured, and they handily won the Women's World Cup. They scrimmaged the Dallas Burns U15 boys team leading up to the World Cup, and they lost 5-2 to 14-year-old boys. So you can't. We're different. Women are better at a lot of things. Men are better at a lot of things. But putting a man against that's completely
physical strength. It just alone would just give the guys advantage. Yes, no, of course. And as it relates to conservation, we haven't really seen that in fishing tournaments or stuff like that yet. I hope that doesn't come
because it doesn't involve physicality. It's more precision, and intelligence. And I think that out of the gate, women are more accurate than men. But if you look at a women's Q coefficient, which is the angle from their hips and their pelvis to their knees, that angle, that's why females have way more ACL injuries growing up, knee tears in soccer and stuff, than boys do. It's a Q coefficient. If you're curious about it, look it up when we're done talking about it. But it's fascinating stuff. I was told, what was I saying before I got off on that rant? Because I could talk about that for hours.
But about the hunting numbers, let's go back to that. Yes.
Okay.
The apathy.
What I'm saying, is this is my opinion. It's not anyone else's. Um, and those people, those activists and all those people that behave erratically, and the Antifa types, like, they can kick our ass 365 days a year. And all we have to do to defeat them in that way of life is show up at the polls one day every 4 years and just vote. So, like, you're the hero of the story. Those people listening and the people that don't want to vote and don't want to register. It's like, you're the solution. You're the hero. Like, we're just the guide. I'm just telling you what to do and where to go. But you're the one that has the ability to make change, So we started vote4america.org, and we're getting people to register to vote by the thousands. It's highly effective. And it's not just that. Like, what you need to do, if you're a conservative and you want conservatives to win in the fall, or if you're a liberal or Democrat that wants those people to win in the fall, all you have to do is find one person that didn't vote in the last election, get them to register, confirm the registration, and go vote. That doesn't cost any money. That's free. It's very, very simple. Find one person, take them to vote, and you win. That's how you do it. Very simple. Simple math. Super simple math. If we could convert, I think it's 2% of all unlicensed hunters and get them to vote, GOP would win in a landslide. Top of the ticket, bottom of the ticket. That's all you got to do.
Especially if people are concerned about hunting. And I'll relate it back to the whole idea of voting, because listeners are very familiar. They know where I stand politically. I'm a conservative, but I try to be fair, give deference to the other side. And there are some hunters who may lean a little more to the middle, maybe a little center left. But I've spoken to a couple center left hunters who've told me they don't have confidence in today's Democrat Party, especially with all this rulemaking that you see from Biden administration. You see different governors get into office. Colorado is one example, Washington State, where they claim and say that they're going to be supporting conservation, yet they stack their wildlife agency boards with anti-hunters, anti-conservationists, and then they start to see changes happen. Colorado this year, it was previously Washington State. Lots of states are saying this, where your vote, if you ignore who you vote for in the governor's mansion, local, state, whatever, you can lose your hunting rights, and you certainly will lose your gun rights too. We see this federally. We see this all across the board, and in the ATF doing a lot of rulemaking they have no authority to do. So who you put into office? Today. Not after today, yes. We're recording on Friday when Chevron, of course, was handed down. It's a good compliment to the West Virginia EPA case, basically saying administrative state, we're going to have an episode on this later, cannot create rules. Only Congress can create rules, essentially. But no, people see that who you vote for, and I've always argued that Republicans have a huge opportunity to appeal to hunters, gun rights advocates, et cetera, and they haven't really done a good job of appealing to them in the best way. And so I try to bring on the ones who are good articulators of conservation, Second Amendment onto the show, who know what they're talking about, can speak to that. But some others don't have the best, I would say, skills to articulate what that is and how to do it unless they partake in the activities themselves. So people kind of see right now center-right causes probably would best advance your gun rights, your public lands access, and your hunting rights too, because we even see Biden try to restrict lead usage on public lands. They're closing down millions of acres to caribou hunting, other types of hunting, OTV, ATV restrictions. So people see that they're losing public lands access from a supposedly conservationist administration, which is why I think Republicans this year, if we're speaking more broadly, there's a huge opportunity for them to get these hunter apathetic, Second Amendment apathetic voters, because people see what's happening on the regulatory side too, and how that's affecting them too.
Yeah, I think that the current administration, I don't call it the Biden administration, the current administration, their conservation policies are driven by environmental activists. Mm-hmm. And like the state of Colorado, Washington State is another horrible, it's a fantastic example of horrible policy. They manage by the ballot box, not by science. Mm-hmm. And science is I believe in science. Like there's you don't believe in science. Science is either right or it's wrong. It's not theory based. It's very binary. It's very simple to interpret. Yes or no. 1-0, right, wrong. But anyone listening that is concerned about gun rights and hunting and all that stuff, like, there were 2 men on that stage last night, one of which whose son is an avid hunter, avid shooter. Like, Donald Trump Jr.'s true passions are hunting and conservation, the outdoors, and shooting. He's obsessed with it. He can talk to you for hours, and he will engage in conversation and dialect for hours, talking about shooting and mechanics and loads and ballistics coefficients and all this stuff that I find incredibly boring. But he is truly, truly passionate about hunting and shooting sports in 2A. Like, so I'm not guaranteeing this, but I promise you this. I'd rather have Don Jr. whispering into the president's ear than Hunter Biden whispering into the president's ear, because, Hunter Biden, he's not a hunter, not a conservationist. So that's a good ally to have up in DC if you're a hunter.
It is true. Yes. Yeah. I've met Don Jr. once. I've seen, how he has influenced his dad with the interior picks. I've spoken at great length to former Secretary Zinke and Bernhardt. So I know he definitely had a hand in their selection to make sure that you have the people who are tasked with, obviously, the conservation, hunting, fishing side. And ATF, we could do better in terms of selection down the road. Hopefully they'll pick someone who's good into the T. That was hard to confirm someone. That wasn't necessarily a horrible pick. It was just Congress was trying to screw over the previous administration in terms of that. So we can definitely have a better ATF pick for the Second Amendment side. But with hunting, you knew who was in charge, who was at the helms of it, and certainly Don Jr. Did that. But then also Hunter Biden, if you look on the alternative side, I've read through Field and Stream, Outdoor Life. I was looking to see what credibility, if any, President Biden, then, VP and formerly Senator Biden, what did he have? He didn't have much experience. Maybe he voted for Pittman Robertson a few times, but there was no talk of really ownership. And his advice about shooting through a door was reprehensible. And then his son, if any of us had lied on our, forms for background checks, we would be in trouble. But his son almost got away with, falsifying a form background check. But he got convicted on that more recently. But he almost got away with it if he hadn't had those charges brought against him. And so it is very clear, even if President Trump doesn't directly hunt, he works. I mean, he was at the Safari Club embassy recently, and there are a lot of people who are very pro-hunting who are in Trump's orbit. So I think people can deduce and know that you have this administration, you have an interior secretary who's anti-hunting, you have all these people Biden is surrounded by who don't like hunting. They've slowly chipped away at it. Same with Second Amendment stuff. And then you can look and say, yeah, I don't really care so much about Trump, or I don't like his rhetoric, whatever. But you do know it is more pro-hunting. And I've heard from different people across the years who've said, I actually believe this is the case now. I dismissed it because I was too beholden to, my partisan views. But people, I think if you present them clear evidence, they do see. And the contrast is very clear and it's obvious.
The Secretary of the Interior is, what's her name? Vaquero from
Deb
New
Haaland.
Mexico? Deb Haaland from New Mexico.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's a fun one. So yeah, I think that hunting rights are further protected and enhanced if the election in November goes one way versus just more of the same. If I think we could.
There's also Florida's right to hunt and fish amendment because in the state level, it's extremely important to codify. There's not a national right to hunt and fish. I don't know if there will ever be an effort. That could be something that people may explore down the road. But I know in Florida, where you live, a lot of my friends are behind that ballot initiative because they see that if Florida continues to grow, there could be people who move there who don't like hunting, don't like fishing, and they could try to change that down the road. Although right for now, it's okay.
Explain. I've heard it. I just haven't looked into it. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. Basically, preemptively protect hunting and fishing rights in Florida in case of, let's say, future legislatures that ban different forms of hunting, different forms of fishing. So 23 states already have these codified into the law. Virginia is one of them, and there's a whole handful of them that have it. But Florida has not yet done so. and it's done, and it doesn't trample on property rights. You're not going to have a obfuscation or ignoring of any rules. If you poach, you're still going to be in trouble, whether or not you have a right to hunt and fish amendment. So laws don't change, standards don't change. It's just a further way to insulate hunting and fishing heritage in the event that someone down the road were to come in as a governor or a legislature and try to incrementally ban different forms of hunting.
Oh, okay. I'm for that.
Mm-hmm. So
Big
yes.
fan.
Yeah, no. So take a look into that, and maybe your guys' efforts will help there. But Baker, as we round out this interview, where would you like to direct people? So obviously the voteforamerica.org website, where should they connect with you individually? Hand that down.
So it's vote4america.org. And then if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, it's Black, which is my middle name, Black Baker at Instagram, or Baker B. Leavitt on Twitter.
Fantastic. We have done a lot of stuff. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up interview when Zoom doesn't try to kick me out of this, Baker, but it's so good to catch up with you. I will continue to follow along with the numbers and hope to amplify those as well. But appreciate you coming on. This is extremely important, and maybe there could be some strides made here.
Thank you so much, Gabriella.
If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.